Hey everyone, Eric Schwartz here, back at you from the basement. Sorry, um, it's been a while, so I apologize for not putting these up sooner. But we have been discussing. We're just going to jump right into it. We've been discussing the Spirit, and if you've seen any other of our videos, then you know the reason why we've been talking about the Spirit, the third person of the Trinity. So you have, just real quick, you have God, the Father, Creator, Parent, however you want to refer to Him. Then you have Jesus, the Savior. And then we've been talking about the Spirit. And the reason why we talk about the Spirit is I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on who this third person of the Trinity is. And the last couple of times we talked about the gifts of the Spirit, those things that the Spirit enables us to do, those gifts, those talents. And ultimately, those gifts and talents and skills are for one purpose, and that's the common good in Jesus Christ, to benefit the church, benefit your world. These are all things that are meant to glorify God and draw people to His heart. They're an expression of God's love to humanity, to your church community, to your friends, your family, etc. And what we said is that not one gift is more important than the other. Now, there may be people that have more gifts than others, but not. And just because that's the case doesn't mean that they're any more empowered by the Spirit than somebody else. They're not holier. They're not more connected to God. It just means that they have been given that particular skill set to reach a certain demographic of people, if you will. I have, if I took an inventory of my gifts and talents, I would say that it's a short list, where there are people that may have a longer list than I do, but they are not called to the same groups that I am. So we talked about that, and we talked about how, again, God gives specific gifts to certain people. Now we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about another aspect, another thing that the Spirit gives us, and that's fruit. And this is something that Jesus talks about. This is something that Paul talks about. And so we're moving away from gifts of the Spirit to fruit of the Spirit. I'm getting ahead of myself, but what's important about that is you'll see in a few minutes that one of the theologians I'll quote says that, when you look at the gifts of the Spirit, that word gift or gifts they're plural. It's a plural word, right? So it means there could be many gifts, there could be a singular gift, whatever. But when you look at the word fruit in the Greek, it's actually one gift. Okay, it's singular, and what he means by that is that we have all been given these fruit, or this fruit, if you will. But what is fruit? Why do we use that metaphor? What is it? What is the purpose? Well, first, it's an indicator of who we are. All right, in John 15:8, I'm just going to read it here. Jesus says, "This is my Father's glorified by this," and this is in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. "My Father's glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples." Now, the New Living Translation puts it this way: "When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. This brings great glory to my Father." Okay? So these are indicators of who you are. So when you've been given the Spirit, when we are given the Spirit, we as believers have been given the Spirit of God, Jesus Himself living in us. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that Jesus' Spirit living in us enables us to do all the things that Jesus did, right? So all those things, grace, mercy, justice, we all have that ability because Jesus lives in us. So this fruit that we have shows the world whose we are. Shows the world that we are followers and disciples of Christ. Now, I'm not an arborist. I'm not a person that knows anything about trees. So I can't look at a leaf by itself, maybe an oak tree, but everybody knows that, right? I can't look at a single solitary leaf or tree bark or even a sapling and say, oh, that is this type of tree. The only time I'd be able to tell that maybe is when fruit starts to emerge from that tree. And when the fruit starts to emerge, or when it's actually come to maturity, then I know, possibly, what kind of fruit tree that is. And in Galatians 5:22 through 23, St. Paul says this: "By contrast, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So these are all things that should emerge from a believer, from a spiritual person. Now, I will say this, a little disclaimer and hopefully encouragement, is that we don't all display these all the time. We may have a couple of these that we do on a daily basis, or maybe right now in your life you have a problem with gentleness. Maybe you have a problem with patience. I don't think that God expects us to have this bushel and we should have that bushel filled with all this fruit all the time. We are human, right? So I think that these begin to emerge, and they will emerge and grow as we grow. And the way we grow spiritually is by doing things. Okay, now I don't mean works in the sense that, okay, you have to do this, this, and this, and if you don't do this, then God won't bless you or won't give you these fruit. It's like working out. I always use that metaphor because I try to do that. When I work at and enjoy my workouts, things start to emerge, muscles and fitness. So, but it takes time, right? So I want us to be encouraged by the fact that, okay, you may not be a gentle person right now, but as you practice spiritual practices, things will start to change and things will start to emerge. And we're going to talk more about that next week. Anyway, as I move on, because I don't want to go too much past 10 minutes here. So all these things are indicators of who Jesus is, or whose we are, that we are Jesus. We're Jesus' disciples. Somebody who I quote often, Richard Rohr, says this in his book, Immortal Diamond. Quote, "The spiritual question is this: does one's life give any evidence of an encounter with God? Does this encounter bring about in you any of the things that Paul describes as the fruits of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustfulness, gentleness, and self-control." So the fruit is evidence that we're spiritual, that we are authentically spiritual. And as I said before, there's this theologian, scholar. His name is Charles Cousar, Cousar. He says this: the first thing of note is that the word fruit in Galatians 5:22 appears in the singular, in contrast to the plural works in 5:19, giving a cohesive and unified character to what the Spirit produces. It is not as if the Spirit in one individual creates love, in another joy, and in a third gentleness. So I'm just going to skip the rest of it. I think you get the point. So not one person is given love, not another person is given patience. These are all things that we are given by the Spirit. But again, it takes time. So why did Jesus and Paul use this metaphor? Well, according to Wikipedia, to define fruit, it says this: the principal botanical purpose of the fruit is the protection and the dissemination of the seed. Let me read that again. The principal botanical purpose of the fruit is the protection and dissemination of the seed. Within us, we all have seeds. We've been given a seed, a message of God's love. So the question I have to ask you is this: overall, what do seeds do? Okay, what do fruit do? Well, we said that, according to that definition, that fruit protects the seed, okay? The purpose of fruit that emerges from a seed is, of course, for consumption. Not only protection of the seed, but for consumption, right? For us, for our vitamins and our minerals and our, just so we can live, right? Now, let's think this through. When a tree produces fruit, a number of things happen. One, we said, according to that definition, the fruit is for the protection of seeds. Secondly, the fruit is for the dissemination of those seeds. Thirdly, the fruit is also for the nourishment of its consumers, whether it's animals or humans. Now, we all produce some sort of fruit. It can be good, it can be bad. So the question we have to ask ourselves, as we continue to ask ourselves questions, is what kind of fruit are you producing? What kind of fruit am I producing? So therefore, as believers, when we produce good fruit, what we saw in Galatians 5:22, it's not for the benefit of ourselves, because trees don't eat their own fruit, right? But this fruit is for the nourishment of others. Jesus said that we are the light of the world. We are salt. We are light. Everything we have in us is for the consumption and nourishment and benefit of others. This is what the fruit is for. It's when we share our fruit, we're planting seeds of God's love, of who God is. And the purpose of seeds are for reproduction. So the fruit that you have you're using to plant seeds to produce what? More seeds, to produce more trees, to produce more fruit. When we share our fruit, it plants seeds, which will reproduce trees, which reproduce fruit, which produce more seeds, etc., etc., etc. That's what the fruit is all about. That's why we bear fruit, so we can reproduce. And we can sow seeds of God's love. When we sow that seed, it produces more fruit and more fruit and more fruit. And more people know who Jesus is and the type of God that we serve. One last thing I want to say. Don't eat plastic fruit. There are people out there that seem to have and display the fruit of the Spirit. But the question is, are they really? Now, I don't want us to constantly look outward. I want us to look inward. But Jesus said in Matthew 17, 15 through 16, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Okay, well, how do we know if they're ravenous wolves if when I look at their fruit, they seem good? You see the preacher on TV, you see the preacher at any church. It could be me. And they seem really nice, and they seem to be loving and patient and gentle. But Jesus said you'll know them by their fruits. But if their fruits seem good, then how will we ever know? Well, he also says this. Let me find it. He says in Luke 12, 1 through 3, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. That is their hypocrisy. Nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have whispered behind closed doors will be proclaimed from the housetops. So let's say there's somebody that you know, okay? Somebody you know personally. And their fruit on the outside, their outward fruit seems good, but you know them personally. We all know this person, right? They're a little hypocritical. What you see up front or in your relationship with them is not bearing good fruit. And you get frustrated and you get angry. But according to this, according to what Jesus is saying here, let's be patient. And I am not good at that. All right? I'm not good at being patient, especially when it comes to injustice. But we have to be patient. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't call people out on their stuff, okay? Because he also says in Matthew 18, 15, I'm going to paraphrase this, but Matthew 18, 15 through 17 shows us a practical way to confront people on their stuff, okay, on their crap. He says this, if another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If that doesn't work, then you take somebody with you to hold you both accountable. And then if that still doesn't work, then you go to your church community, your spiritual community, or you bring in somebody who's spiritually mature that can help you resolve these issues. And then Jesus says, if you still have not found resolution, then really what you need to do, you need to cut them off. You need to put up those boundaries. Okay, so beware of plastic fruit and beware that your fruit isn't plastic. If we go back a step and we say, we point out what Jesus, or we talk about what Jesus said here, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You know them by their fruits. How do we know? Inwardly. So we cultivate healthy, non-plastic fruit inwardly. It's about who we are inwardly. And when we know that there are people, and we know people that have plastic fruit that are deceiving others, I would say, if you know them personally, then definitely confront them according to Matthew 18, 15. If you don't, then you pray that God helps you to deal with it. I am dealing with people in my life like that a lot. So we need to pray that God gives us the patience, and also how that is forming us spiritually. So, fruit, what is it? Well, I'll tell you. I'll recap. Each one of us have been given the fruit for consumption and reproduction. We're to beware of plastic fruit, but not at the expense of our own cultivation. We need not constantly inspecting other fruit. There are times where we do, and we need to call out rotten fruit, but we have to be aware of our own fruit, okay? And this fruit that we bear are signposts to the maturity in our spirituality. So that's that. As always, you can check us out at thegatecc.com. You can go to our Facebook page. You can subscribe to our podcast if you want the full sermon. Just look for us on the podcast store. As always, share, like, comment, etc. Great, good. Love you guys, and we'll see you next time. Peace.